You're very welcome along. We're talking NFL now. The draft started overnight in Kansas City. The first round is in the books. It's the one day of the year that everybody feels good about their NFL life, apart maybe from the Dolphins, who didn't get to pick because their owner met Tom Brady on a boat. Before the draft actually happened, though, Lamar Jackson signed a $260 million contract. So that's over 5 years. It's going to make him the highest paid player in the NFL on an annual basis. 185 million of the contract is guaranteed, so no matter what happens, he gets that. The other big news that happened, obviously, over the course of the week was that Aaron Rodgers' deal to the New York Jets had been finalised. So that was all in the books before the picking started, and I'm delighted to say Mike Carlson is with us now to try and pick through the wreckage a little bit of what happened. Will we start with Lamar Jackson and the amazing timing, like at the precise moment where the whole world is focused on the NFL? They're like, yeah, no, we don't worry, we always had this in hand.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure it was that easy for either side, but it is something that you wanted to get done by that point, because obviously going into the draft, you need to know exactly where you stand at the most important position. Odd thing with Lamar is he doesn't have an agent, and I think that probably hurt the negotiations. At one point, he said he was done with Baltimore, and that's it. And part of the thing an agent does for you is provide a buffer between yourself and the ownership. He got, as you said, the biggest contract, $5 million more over 5 years than Jalen Hurts got from the Eagles about a week ago, and he could have had $175 million guaranteed last August. So you could argue that he held out for the better part of a season, and then the off season to get an extra 10 mil, and he saves probably $3 million on not no more than that, on $5 million on not having an agent. But everyone's happy now. Lamar's back with Baltimore. Baltimore got him a decent receiver in the draft, so he'll be happy with that, because that's been a problem for them for the last 5 years or so. And quarterbacks were the big story in the draft. No surprise, somewhat of a surprise, and then huge surprise as the draft began with the first 4 picks.
Did you think that Baltimore weren't going to get a deal done for Jackson, or was the fact that nobody came in when they could have signed him, was that always a signal that they were going to do a deal at some point?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The problem being that in order to get Jackson, you would have to get him to first sign his franchise offer, which Baltimore had given him, and then you would have to give up 2 first-round draft picks, which actually isn't that much when you consider, for example, what the Jets paid for Aaron Rodgers. Just to go for maybe 1 year, maybe 2, but it's probably more than any team was willing to give up, because to some extent, I like Lamar Jackson a lot, but he's somebody that you have to adjust your offense to, in the sense of using his running ability. And it worked really well for Baltimore for a couple of seasons until he got hurt. And that's always the problem, which is a consideration in the draft. With Anthony Richardson, for example, was a consideration for Jalen Hurts. So you need a team that's committed to bringing the best out of the talent that he has.
That point about him being hurt, I do hope that he was minding himself for this contract at the end of last season and was making a business decision instead of going out there and having his knee ripped apart, like, say, RG3 did, for example, when if he hadn't gone out and worn the brace, who knows what his career would have been. So I do hope that quarterbacks are protecting themselves and learning, and that actually we're going to see the full range of his talents in the future.
I hope so too. And I think that was part of the problem with Baltimore, because I think they probably felt that he was able to play at the point last year where he basically took himself out of the season. They thought he might be and they were expecting him to do that. And I think you're absolutely right that with his contract on the line and all, it was the smart thing to do for him. And the ethos in football remains to take one for the team, as it were. But the money is. The money is the winning thing for the modern NFL.
The other thing that happened, obviously, over the course of the last week that settled down just in time for the draft was that Aaron Rodgers finally got the 2 teams finally got the deal done to confirm Aaron Rodgers' arrival in New York. He'd obviously gone on Pat McAfee 40 days ago. 40 days in the desert,
It's become a popular meme in the NFL these days between Tom Brady and him. He went into his, darkness cave and somewhere in Oregon and came out after drinking a gallon of ayahuasca tea. And eventually that deal got done. I was kind of thinking that the Packers might wait until after June 1st when their cap would do much better getting rid of Rodgers. But they really did, I think, want to get the draft taken care of and included in the deal. So as it stands now, the Packers will carry a huge dead money cost against their cap, but the actual money they're spending on quarterbacks now will be a lot less. And the Jets are pretty much okay with Rodgers' deal the way it is. But if he doesn't play next year, which with Aaron Rodgers is always a possibility, they'll carry a huge cap hit as a result of what's been remaining on that huge deal he signed back when it was the biggest deal for quarterbacks. But the immediate problem for them was an interesting one in the draft, because part of the draft was they simply swapped number 1 picks with Green Bay, and Green Bay took the number 13 pick, and the Jets therefore had the 15 pick. They thought no big deal, 2 spots. But in the 14th spot was New England, and New England traded out of it to Pittsburgh, who immediately took Broderick Jones, who was the last of the 4 best offensive tackles, and the guy that most people had sort of mocked to the Jets, certainly one of those tackles to them as a great need. And they therefore didn't get one of the top tackles. They wound up taking a defensive player, Will McDonald, from Kansas State. And New England got Christian Gonzalez, who many of us thought was the second best cornerback in the draft, all the way down at 17. So it was kind of a win-win for New England as they hurt the Jets and helped themselves.
So Bill Belichick screwed the Jets again. You can just imagine how delighted he was making. Oh yeah, absolutely. And you're going to pick an offensive lineman who, would have been otherwise protecting Aaron Rodgers and causing me trouble. Absolutely, you can totally have that pick. One of the things I think we should just talk about there's a lot of casual sports fans listening tonight who aren't really that into the NFL draft part of the season, but actually one of the real draws of being an NFL fan is that you have this period of the year where you think anything is possible. So I've looked at various websites this morning who are rating the performance of the various teams, and even the Broncos were getting a B because no one knows how the draft is going to work out, because one of their picks essentially has gone on picking getting Sean Payton. And you're like, right. That's a bit of a reach, I've got to say. I would have said that, but that's how it is. It's hope.
It's a great debate. It's a great debate to have, exactly how much value a coach brings to a team. But I think in Sean Payton's case, it's probably deserved. And of course, the pick that we're talking about went to New Orleans. And it was the 29th pick of 31. So, that loss is not so huge. But, it's funny because fans have extreme positions. Either their team blew it completely or they had a great draft, whereas the management of the team almost always says, we had this guy rated really high on our board and we were really glad he fell to us, whether or not that's absolutely true. So I think it's a fun event. It's torturous to watch. Because of all the glitz that they've attached to it, and all the players dressed up like it was their senior prom in high school, and all of the NFL reporters in their cocktail dresses doing the red carpet thing like it was the Oscars, and it gets pretty irritating to us old curmudgeons who just want to discuss the football. And very few of us do really well on mock drafts overall because it's so hard to predict. You can rate the players, and some people can be fairly accurate as to rating the players, but it's hard to rate the teams and to understand what the teams are thinking, much less, you can even say that this player is a good fit for that team, but you don't know if their front office agrees with you. So mock drafts, I think I got 5 of the first 15, and I could cheat and say I got a couple more because I had the right guy, but the wrong, the team moved up and that kind of stuff. And I think that's a pretty good year for me.
I'd say that's not bad at all. Yeah.
But otherwise afterwards, then the analysis, becomes really interesting. And you look at the risks team take, you look at the teams that sort of sit pat and have something come to them. You look at patterns within the draft where, for example, in this one at pick 20, Seattle took a wide receiver, Jackson Smith, and the next 3 picks were 3 wide receivers because everybody panicked and figured now that one's gone, we better get the one that we want. And you can see that stuff happening. And although you're starting to get really tired around 3 a.m, it's it's kind of fun to actually watch that happen before your eyes.
We should go on.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say we should talk about the stuff that happened at the top of the draft. So I think everybody knew that Bryce Young was going to be the number 1 off the board, and he was, because Carolina traded up for him a long time ago. And that's the other thing that we should just point out for casual sports fans, is that this is actually the best part about the NFL. The worst team gets to pick first. So no matter how bad you are after a period of time, you do get somebody who you hope is going to be pretty good. And it doesn't always work. The bad teams always seem to be picking at the top of the draft, but even Jacksonville have managed to stop picking at the top of the draft because they eventually got somebody good. So Carolina...
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And then what happens as well, Chicago were the team with the number 1 pick in the draft. They traded it to Carolina, so they moved down from 1 to 9, but they also picked up a 2nd-round pick, a 1st-rounder next year, a 2nd-rounder the year after that, plus DJ Moore, a wide receiver, who's probably worth a 1st-round pick himself nowadays. So you can use those draft picks not just to replenish yourself with the best player in the draft, but also to replenish yourself by adding players and/or draft picks. And if those picks work out, you get much stronger.
The other thing, the Lamar Jackson contract, the reason that it hadn't been signed, or one of the reasons it hadn't been signed, was because Deshaun Watson had got a fully guaranteed contract in the deal that gave Houston a load of picks and gave them the power over the draft. That and the fact that they were such a bad team, they were picking high as well. They've spent basically all that capital in this year's draft. How do you think they did?
Well, it's funny. I mean, I felt that it was right for them to stay at 2 and take C.J. Stroud. Stroud's draft stock dropped considerably as Bryce Young's rose, and some people were actually, having him way down. But I thought, especially given that they're going to run a San Francisco-style offense, Stroud should be able to do that. You think of the kind of quarterbacks that the Niners have used effectively, and he should be very good at it. But then what they did was trade up from the 12th pick to which they had got for Cleveland in the Deshaun Watson deal, to take Will Anderson with number 3. Now, Anderson was the top-rated pass rusher in the draft, and they gave up a lot for him, a 2nd-round pick, a 1st-rounder next year, and a 3rd-rounder next year. So the question is whether that was worth it in a draft that had quite a few quality outside pass rushers, but Anderson was probably the most effective of that lot, and something DeMeco Ryans probably wanted. I was a little mistaken because I thought he might want an inside player like Jalen Carter, but Carter slipped a bit in the draft. So they've added 2 blue chippers as potentially with the 2nd and 3rd picks of the draft, but at some cost. And then with Stroud and Young gone, the next question was, everybody knew Indianapolis at 4 was going to take a quarterback. They didn't panic and try to trade up to get the guy they wanted, partly because the guy they wanted was Anthony Richardson, who lots of us thought would not go that high. He's an amazing athlete. Think about Cam Newton, but a better athlete than Cam Newton. Big, like 6'4", 245 pounds, incredible runner. He ran the 40-yard on under 4.3. If the NFL had a decathlon event, he'd probably be the winner. Unfortunately, you have to pass if you're a quarterback, and that's his problem. But Indianapolis's new head coach, Shane Steichen, was the offensive coordinator in Philadelphia, and the guy who gets the credit for making Jalen Hurts, who's a running kind of quarterback, more effective. So the thought was that he might go for Richardson, and some of us thought he might go for Will Levis, who was the other of the 4 top quarterbacks. And Levis fell right out of the 1st round entirely, and Richardson went to Indianapolis with that 4th pick.
Yeah, it's funny. Lamar was the 32nd pick all those years ago. There was no 32nd pick, as I said, because Miami had theirs taken off them because they wanted Tom Brady, and the league found out about it, and you can't do that. And it's quite the punishment. So who knows where the 32 pick will end up being. It may well be another quarterback. We'll see where Levis ends up. It's funny, we don't talk about the best teams at this time of the year. We always talk about the worst teams and where the best players of this current generation are going. It is in Kansas. How did the Chiefs do? How did the Eagles do? And
Yeah, the Chiefs were picking last, 31st in the draft, and they took a guy, Felix Anudike-Uzomah, also from Kansas State, their defense, who's basically an edge rusher, defensive end for them. But he'll be ticketed to kind of replace Frank Clark in their lineup. He's a lot like George Karlaftis, who they already have. And not a bad pick. I mean, a decent enough player at that spot. But Philadelphia won the draft, as far as I'm concerned. Jalen Carter, who I mentioned, I thought he was the top player in the draft before he was on Georgia with the national championship team, and after their celebration party for winning the national championship, he was racing with a teammate in cars against a car that was had two of the women who were working in the college recruiting department, and they had a car crash. His car didn't, the other car did, but they were racing, and that's an offense which he got suspended sentence for and probation for, but it caused him to drop down in the draft. He also, it seemed, to divert his attention from football. But as I said, I thought he was the best player in the draft before that happened. I also thought Seattle would take him with the 5th pick. They didn't. They took the best cornerback in the draft with the 5th pick. And as he was dropping, Philadelphia switched picks with Chicago. They gave Chicago a 4th rounder for next year to move up from 10 to 9. And they took Jalen Carter from Georgia. And then Nolan Smith, a pass rusher from Georgia, fell to them at the 30th pick. So now they have 4 players off of Georgia's national championship team from 2021, including Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean. So their defense could start 4 Georgia players who've all played with each other. And it's just, when you're in that position, when you're that far down in the draft, to be able to build up, strengthen yourself in that manner is really a credit to Howie Roseman, the GM, who's killed it the past couple of years. He was right about taking the risk on Jalen Hurts. He got coaches who could make the best of him, and he's built a team that most teams at that level find hard to maintain that level. But he learned from Andy Reid. It's not really a coincidence, and he's done a great job as general manager. I think that was one of the big wins of the draft, was just for a team that good to pick up that much talent in the first round of this draft.
All right, Mike, we'll leave it there. Unless there's any other specific takeaways that you think we should touch on.
Just probably a couple. Interesting that Bijan Robinson, who was the best running back in the draft from Texas. It's always a problem because the analytics people quite rightly suggest that running backs are more or less fungible. Every team managers seem to find somebody in the 3rd or the 4th or the 5th round, and they don't last long. Running backs have terrible injury histories. If you think of, say, Saquon Barkley, who went 2nd overall to the Giants. So the question was, who would bite on Bijan Robinson? I actually thought Philadelphia, had they stayed at 10, might have taken him to replace Miles Sanders, and you don't often get a kind of generational or a possible generational running back. But he went to Atlanta, which surprised me in the sense that Atlanta had 2 running backs. They got Tyler Allegier in the 5th round last year, and they also had Cordero Patterson, who got hurt, which gave Allegier a lot of playing time. But when you thought about it, their offense, Arthur Smith, comes from Tennessee, where they had Derrick Henry, and Robinson's not a Derrick Henry type of back. He's more of a Alvin Kamara kind of back, but he's a guy who can run a lot, who can catch the ball, and he could be their workhorse back, and alternating with Allegier could be really good. So it made a lot of sense for Atlanta to do that. It also made a lot of sense for Buffalo to trade up with Jacksonville. Jacksonville had the 24th pick, and they traded down twice to 27 and still got a starting tackle in Anton Harrison. But Buffalo traded up to get Dalton Kincaid, who was probably the top-rated tight end. But the tight ends, it was a very deep class of tight ends, but divided between blockers and receivers and all-around guys. And Dalton Kincaid was by a margin, the best receiving tight end in the bunch. They already have Dawson Knox at tight end. But what this says to me is that they're going to run a lot of 2 tight end offenses with only 2 wide receivers, where they have Davis and Diggs, and a running quarterback in Josh Allen. And it's going to create the kind of mismatches that the Patriots used to get when they had Aaron Hernandez and Gronk together at the same time. Not that either guy is as good as those 2 guys, but what it does when they're both in the lineup is it makes you decide who's going to cover whom. And Knox is a pretty good tight end all around, in the sense that he can block and he can get downfield.
Yeah.
So I think it was a great offensive move for the Bills.
A lot of fantasy implications for those last 2 ones that you mentioned there, which I'm sure is of interest to everybody.
Make a little note now. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. Mike, good to have you with us. Thanks a million. Enjoy the rest of it. Cheers.
Thanks, Ger.